Morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. Whether you're joining us here in person on Park Avenue or online at stbarts.org. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it's my joy to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And on this weekend, as we celebrate all of God's creation through the work and ministry of Francis of Assisi, we are especially delighted to have back home here at St. Bart's Peter DeMenocal. Peter is a former vestry member, longtime member of St. Bart's, who taught at Columbia for 33 years before moving up to Cape Cod, where he is now president of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He'll talk a little bit about that work, I'm sure. Peter, it is really wonderful to have you back and to help us think about the joys and challenges of God's creation this weekend.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter, for having me back. And Dean, it's great to see you here today, and to see so many friends in the room. And I don't know who's online, but I just got to say, it was just such a warm welcome coming back to my home here in New York, coming back here. And I just thank you for having me. So today, so first of all, I was at Columbia for 33 years. I was Dean of Science. I gave up tenure. I left my Dean position and became the 11th president of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is a 100-year-old institution on Cape Cod. If that's Cape Cod, it's right down here. And it's very different than the Upper West Side, but we are loving it there. It's great. But the reason why I made the move is when you look at the Earth from space, what color is it? It's blue. The ocean is 71% of the surface area, but really everything we care about snaps back to the ocean. And that's kind of the storyline for today. And the oceanographic is best known, I think, for a lot of the things we've done. We discovered the Titanic, we discovered hydrothermal vents, life in the bottom of the ocean. But the main reason is we have these exceptional scientists that are coupled with amazing engineers. And then we have 2 global-class ships that can go anywhere in the world's oceans for a month or 6 weeks at a time. We have a submarine called Alvin, a human-occupied sub that goes down to about 4 miles depth. We've done 5,000 dives without incident. I dove on it myself, you'll see in a moment. It's just this sort of candy shop for researchers who want to study the ocean. And the oceans are under tremendous change. So the storyline I'm going to share with you today is on climate, carbon, and the deep sea. And basically, I will have been successful if you care about the deep sea in a different way than you might have when you entered. And this is really the work of dozens and dozens of our scientists. So when you hear me talking, I'm really representing them. We have about 1,100 people total at the Woods Hole Oceanographic, so it's a big place. And this is going to be a protagonist in my slide. So I've got a bunch of things that I'm going to show you that very few people have seen. And actually, I just put something in this morning that no one has seen. So this is kind of one of the fun things about this job is it's really a place of discovery and exploration. But when we go out into the open ocean, most of us, when we interact with the ocean, it's dipping our toes in the ocean or swimming, perhaps, or maybe boating. But when you get out into the blue ocean, you'll see majestic animals such as this, swordfish. And they are these not only creatures of the sunlit portions of the ocean, but they tell us a lot about what's called the twilight zone, which is the place where sunlight goes to extinction about 3,000 feet down in the ocean. This turns out to be one of the most important places in the ocean. So an analogy that I like to show here is when we look outside, particularly around here, and you see a tree, or you go through Central Park and you see lots of trees and they're green and the grass is green, that's the outward sign of a healthy ecosystem. But what's sustaining the tree, the grasses, and everything else is what's below the surface, what you can't see. 95% of the carbon of a tree is actually below the surface. So what's really sustaining it is something you can't see. Well, that's very true for the ocean as well. What sustains the ocean is the nutrient and the carbon that's in the twilight zone. This goes down from about 100 meters down to about 1,000 meters in the ocean. It's far deeper than any of us can swim. Probably none of you have been down that deep, and it's a very different kind of experience. So we're going to talk about this a little bit and get you to think about and perhaps care about the twilight zone. So this is one of our ships. This is, one moment. This is the Atlantis. She's about 270 feet long, purpose-built for research, can go in any of the oceans. And this is actually a cruise that I was on about a year ago off of San Diego, where I had the opportunity to dive in Alvin. And I'd never dived in Alvin before, and I want to just share with you why it was such a sort of life-changing experience. So this ship is purpose-built for scientific research. Oh, come on, you can do it. There we go. This ship is purpose-built for research. You'll see it has an A-frame on the back. This is me getting into the sail of Alvin, which is it has a titanium sphere that's about 4 inches thick, about 6 feet in diameter. And this is what it's like when you're in Alvin. And this is our pilot, Bruce Strickrott, and he's giving the command to dive, and we basically release our tether to the ship and dive. And this is what it's like when you go down into the twilight zone. And what's hard to see here, you could in a dark room, is you see colors you've never seen on land. You'll see this spectrum of colors as you go to black. You'll go through an indigo that you've never seen before, an aqua, a turquoise. It's really incredible. And then as you start to look around in the ocean with the lights off, you'll notice that everything communicates with light down in the ocean. I can move back if you'd like. Here. When you go down below the surface, when it's in the twilight zone, it's nearly black, and so everything starts communicating by light. And you'll see these flashes of color. For instance, as you're descending in the sub, it disturbs the animals around you, and they start glowing and communicating with each other. It's best described as almost like a fireworks display when you're down there. And it turns out that there's a massive ecosystem in the twilight zone. The biomass in the twilight zone, going down to about 3,000 feet, is 100 times greater than in the sunlit portions where we get all our seafood from. So it's this massively productive place that is cycling carbon, cycling nutrients, and making them available again to the surface where the sunlight is. Now, one of our scientists, actually the lead of this project, Dr. Heidi Sosik, gave a TED Talk about 6 years ago about the twilight zone. It's one of the most undiscovered last frontiers on the planet. I want to get a hat that says "Space is easy," and because it's true. Engineering for space is child's play compared to what it takes to go to the bottom of the ocean. It's incredibly hostile. It's corrosive. The pressures, for instance, at Alvin, when you dive to Alvin at its maximum depth, pushing on the top of the submarine where there's a hatch that's just big enough for your hips to get through. The water pressure that's on that's equivalent to two fully loaded 747s end to end on top of just your hatch. And of course, it's all the way around as well. So it just gives you, the pressures are crushing. And that's just part of it. It's near freezing down there. It's very corrosive because it's salty. Everything wants to eat you or kill you. So she gave a talk about the Twilight Zone, and she so inspired the TED audience that they had actually just started something called the TED Audacious Project. I don't know if you've heard about this, but a group of family offices, a small number of them, came together and said, these are ideas that change the world. Let's fund some of them to do what they really are saying they want to do. And so they actually awarded us about $34 million. The overall cluster of 8 projects that they funded just ended last year, or this year rather. And that was about a $220 million investment by families, by philanthropists. And so our goal was to do the science, the engineering, and the sort of impact outreach of the Twilight Zone to understand it. Now, the one thing about the Twilight Zone that is really hallmark, and actually was discovered in World War II by the Navy when they were pinging the ocean and realized there was a false bottom. They know there's not a shoreline or a seafloor there, but yet it looks like a seafloor. And the reason why it looks like a seafloor is there's an acoustic return that you're getting from all these fish that are in the Twilight Zone. Well, it turns out the bottom goes up and down twice a day. It's the largest animal migration on the planet that you've never seen. Every ocean, pole, equator, pole, big oceans, small oceans, Mediterranean, everywhere. And what it is the diel or daily migration of of fish and shrimp and other organisms that go down to about 1,000 meters when the sun is up, because they're escaping predation in the sunlit portion. And then when the sun goes down, they go back up to the surface to feed in safety. And they go up and down, and I calculated it. It's the equivalent of running a marathon, a human running a marathon twice a day. That's the size, speed, distance ratio that they're doing. So this annual cycle of moving up and down in every ocean is this tremendous carbon pump where they eat carbon and consume primary production, phytoplankton in the surface ocean at nighttime, and then they go down at depth and they excrete it below. And all the while, that's kind of a carbon pump. And it's tremendously important. It's measured in the billions of tons, and it's roughly about a quarter of global emissions is taken up by this process naturally. And that comes in. Now, if you go down and say, who's down there? This is the most abundant vertebrate on the planet. There's roughly 3.5 chickens for every human. There are about 100,000 of these bristle-mouthed fish that are about the size of my finger in the twilight zone for every human. So there's like one every square yard or square meter. I mean, they're just incredibly abundant. And these are these guys that are moving up and down. You'll notice they have these organelles that are light emitting, and so these are the guys that are flashing light when you're down there. The light becomes interesting down the way. So one of the things that we did with this TED Audacious Award was to come up with new ways to image the twilight zone. It's a very hard place to visit because it's so deep, and it's also a hard place to image. But you know, in medical research, for example, we can use sound, ultrasound, to image body parts, and we can apply that same technology, but tuned for the ocean. So this is a very expensive fish finder, like you might have on a ship. But instead of being on the bottom of a ship pointing down, we actually take this down to about 2,000 feet water depth and point it up. The reason why we take it down and put it on a mooring, suspend it in the middle of the ocean and point it upward, it's 1,000,000 times quieter when you're in this zone of the ocean. So it's as quiet as you could ever make it. And then the sound source is perfectly tuned to capture the swim bladders of these fish and these organisms. So you get a perfect echo. So we can identify every fish in the water column between this thing at about 2,000 feet all the way up to the surface. And so one of the things we discovered is that if you, just like a sonogram, this is the surface of the ocean. This is, I think it's 600 or 800 meters. This is the sound source. It's doing an image of the full volume of water between the surface and 800 meters. Anything that's red or white is lots of fish, and anything that's a dark blue is no fish. And then it's going every day for 14 days. So whenever it goes up, anyone can say, is that daytime or nighttime? When all the white things go up to the surface, that's nighttime. Yeah, and then during the daytime, when the sun comes out, they all go down to about 1,000 meters. And so this is just one location, but you can see how variable it is, location to location. Well, we do this all year long, and we can do it in multiple locations. So for the first time, we're doing this kind of sonogram of all the life that's in the ocean. And what I could show you in another slide, but I won't, is that every one of these little tick marks is actually a fish. We can zoom in on it, and it's an acoustic return from a specific fish. And we can actually trace their behavior. So the way they go up isn't, they don't just swim up. They actually swim in a helix, going up and down. We can see these things just going up and down these helixes. Don't know why they do that. The other thing we did was to tag top predator fish, because there are a lot of fish that feed in the twilight zone. This is a blue shark, and we tagged him on Cape Cod. And what we're going to see is his movement throughout the ocean, going up and down in the water column, but also moving around in the ocean. What's shown here in red is the Gulf Stream. That's the Gulf Stream moving. And the reason why it's not just a single current and lots of blobs is that they have these eddies. The Gulf Stream spins off these eddies. And these eddies are like city-sized storms in the ocean that can have tons of biologic activity at their margins. So you're going to watch this guy as he leaves Cape Cod, and we tagged him. He's going up and down, and then what does he do? he goes to one of these blobs, one of these storm areas. It's an eddy, and it's a sushi bar. He's basically going there and just feeding and just working the edges of the side of it. Again, behavior that we hadn't seen before. So for those of you who eat swordfish, we're going to see what swordfish eat. Turns out about 90% of the biomass of a swordfish comes from what's called the mesopelagic, the twilight zone, this dark part of the ocean. That's why their eyes are so big. That's why there's big-eye tuna. When you look at the big predator fish, they often have big eyes because they're adapted for working in the very low light of the twilight zone. So if you cut open, sorry, I know it's just for church, but if you cut open the swordfish and look in its gut, you'll see that actually it had just eaten a lancet fish. Can you see the teeth up in the top and the eye? But if you look carefully, what else do you see? It's like a Russian doll. There's another fish inside of it. Look at the bottom of the image. So that fish, the lancet fish, ate a barracuda. That's what that guy is there. And then if you open up the barracuda, he's loaded with lanternfish, those little finger-like things I was telling you about. So about 90-some-odd% of the diet of a swordfish is, and here we've got 4 trophic levels in one fish, and they're all predator fish. It's not even going to the primary production that's sustaining them. Now, one of the challenges of going to the twilight zone is that everything responds to light and pressure. And so if you go down there and wave your arms, everything's just going to run away from you, and it'll flash. It'll be like, danger, run away. So you can't go down there with a net because then they'll all run away from the net. So we developed a robot called Misot, mesopelagic robot, Misot, and made a cartoon, a kid's book, by the way. It's an excellent book, particularly for kids with differences, where the weird things are. It's a really great book. So we produced this book as an outreach tool, but Misot was purpose-built to basically be a Land Rover for the deep ocean. Basically, it can go down and be very quiet. It has very low torque motors, and it can hover at a given depth. And then it's built with binocular vision and has a NVIDIA chip in its forehead, and basically it's super smart, and it can track organisms, it can learn on the fly. It's this really smart robot. This just gives you an idea. We built it from scratch. This is one of our engineers, Molly. They're welding up the superstructure here, putting in the brains and the materials. This is the one who developed it, Dana Yerger. We test it, and we have 50 test tanks at the Oceanographic. And this is this guy descending now. And you'll see, here's the binocular vision. And when it goes down at depth, you start getting these 4K images of the deep ocean like we've never had before. And you start seeing, there's a swordfish running, running through. And you start seeing these organisms that are just remarkable. I mean, just the depth of things that you see, or the breadth of life that you see in the deep ocean. Most of it is bioluminescent. Now, I'm going to show you something that's new. This is what no one's seen before. Dana Yerger was working with a high school student, this guy over here on the left, and he developed what's called an optical lure. Now, if you want to go down to the twilight zone and watch, you can just sit there and wait for things to come to you, which is okay, but what if you made a lure? What if you actually used light? And so he built kind of a tennis ball-sized device. That's this guy flashing here. And it can do different colors. It can do different patterns. It can look like a jellyfish. It can look like a tuna. It can look like lots of different things. And that's right here, if you can see where I'm pointing. That's right there. And then we have these high-def cameras that are imaging it. So we just launched this, we developed this just a couple of months ago. We launched it off of American Samoa. And last week, Dana Yerger sent me these images that I'm going to show you. There's the lure right there. And let me just see if it's on. Oh, there we go. Okay. There's the lure, and lots of sharks in the ocean. So he passes by once, and then something happens from below. And then we go to our alternate camera. We have a camera on the side that's like a navigation camera, and there's a shark basically attacking it from below. So that's the whole point, is to make a lure to draw the fish to you. We've done this with giant squid. We've done it with lots of different things. So the idea here was to really go down with this vehicle now and to actually actively explore the ocean by luring the organisms to us. And what we found is that when you flash these things, the whole undersea flashes back at you. There's a whole communication that goes on down there. When you're down there as well, it's like a giant snowstorm. And this is because all the life that's in the sunlit portions of the oceans, everything's eating each other, and all the waste material is raining its way through the deep ocean. This is the most stupendous snowfall on Earth, but it's this carbon, this rain of carbon that's coming down. Remember, we talked about how large this billions of tons. This is one of the ways that the ocean makes Earth habitable. If this were to suddenly stop, global temperatures would rise by about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Earth would become uninhabitable. And every other breath of oxygen comes from the ocean, that would stop too. So this is this sort of everywhere kind of process. But understanding how it changes and how to measure it is actually one of the big things that we work on. This is an organism called a siphonophore. It's about as big as a football field. This is from the Schmidt ocean folks. But it's a colonial organism, community organism, that actually consists of lots of individual cells that all hang out together. Some are for reproduction, some are for propulsion, some are for digesting. And they make a mucus web between these strands, and it captures all that carbon that's coming down. So it acts like a big spider's net. And then, it's a fascinating place, but why do we care about it as a planet? It turns out that to try to understand what's happening in the twilight zone, remember I told you it's actually hard to get to, it's corrosive, it's dangerous, it's expensive. Misot is probably a $2 million purpose-built robot whose only job is to go down there. It's a very expensive place to do science. So one of the things we've got is actually an armada of robots that are in the ocean today. They're called Argo floats, and they are doing something really fascinating. This has been around for a couple of decades now, but they're about the size of a person. You drop them in the ocean like that, and then there's one for every roughly state of Virginia in terms of the aerial coverage. And what it'll do is it'll sink down to about 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet, hang out there for about a week, and then it'll go down to 2,000 meters or about a half a mile and hang out there. And then it'll ascend its way up to the whole water column, all the while measuring temperature, pressure, and salinity. And then when it gets up to the surface, it phones home. It makes an iridium phone call home, downloads its data real time, comes to our labs, clears its buffer, and goes down and does it again. And all of them are just pogo sticking up and down. Now, if you get all of those data for the global ocean for the last 20 years, so this is 2004 to actually just over the summer, anywhere where we see it's blue, it's colder than average for this period. Anywhere where we see it's red, it's warmer than average. You can totally see that the oceans are warming. The warming is also now descending to the deepest levels. And in fact, in the North Atlantic, these warm waters have made their way to the bottom of the ocean. So water has a much higher heat capacity than air. In fact, this warming that's going in the ocean, it's about 93% of the energy imbalance that we're getting from the buildup of greenhouse gases. So this ocean warming is a big deal. So one of the things I used to do at Columbia is I have a little glass of water here, and as that glass of water warms, it actually occupies a larger volume. The molecules are moving faster. It occupies more volume, so that's why a hot air balloon rises. The same thing for the ocean. As the ocean warms, it expands. And because the ocean is so thick, when you warm up a big, thick chunk of the ocean, you get sea level rise. About half of sea level rise is because the oceans are warming. And one of the things I've learned in this job is make it local. And so we're going to go to New York. This is a tool that one of my faculty developed with NASA. This is the tide gauge station at the Battery. You can see a little red dot, but you can pick any place here where you're interested. And this is the hourly record of tidal sea level rise going back, in this case, back to the 1930s. This is in the Battery. These are actual data for New York. And you can see this gradual trend toward higher sea level rise, and it's risen by about that much in New York, about up to your knee or so. In red are what they call flooding events, when water is about 1.5 feet higher than mean high tide. And you can see there's more red today than there was back in the 40s and 30s. And actually, the number of flooding events has gone from sort of 3, 4, or 5 50 years ago to more like 10 or 12 today. And this is actually when I last gave my talk at St. Bart's. I gave a talk like this. I've done about four or five of these forums. This was Hurricane Sandy. And I was here, I think it was a day before Hurricane Sandy, talking about sea level rise and flooding. And I remember coming to church the next Sunday, and everyone was like, "How did you know?" But you can see that the floodings are increasing. I mean, this is data, this is observations, it's not models, this is like what you actually feel. For those of you who want to know what it's like in your area or a house that you have somewhere else, this tool is fantastic. You can convert our knowledge about New York is expected on average to see 4 feet of sea level rise. Remember, it's gone up about 1.5 feet by the end of this century, by 2100. And again, you remember at 2020 we have about 15 flooding days a year. You go down to the Battery, and there's roughly 15 days a year on average when you've got water coming over the rail. When you get toward the end of the century, it's basically every day. What's called the time of inflection, you'll notice it's not a straight line, it's a quadratic, it's a nonlinear. The time when it doubles next is just about 15 years from now. So the rate is accelerating sea level rise, and that rate is self-accelerating. New York, being New York, are planning for 6 feet of sea level rise, and this is what 6 feet of sea level rise looks like. But all of the airports are underwater. Manhattan as a place, other than Dumbo gets nailed. But other than Lower Manhattan gets impacted pretty strongly. But really, it's New Jersey and Long Island that really take the brunt. But the main thing is that a lot of the infrastructure upon which we depend is compromised. Years ago, I used to leave it there and talk to my students, any questions, and it'd be just absolute depressed faces looking back at me. And so one of the reasons why I made this move from Columbia to the oceanographic is because I want to do something about it. And because we're an engineering place, because we have a joint program with MIT, so we have these really incredible students and postdocs as well. And we're really focusing on solutions. Well, we've got the same problem in Woods Hole. This is the map of Woods Hole with 4 feet of sea level rise. And we've got our own problem. And we are totally preparing for it. We have to rebuild our dock facility, which is this thing right here. That's 2 acres of concrete. It's about $120 million that I have to raise to replace it, build it up 2.5 feet higher. But one of the things we've learned is that for our adaptation strategies, which is very similar to New York, it's 3 things. First is you protect what you can, putting seawalls around areas where you need to protect or elevate structures. You can migrate, you take your assets away from the place that's being impacted and move it to higher ground. We have another campus, we have 2 campuses, one right on the water, one 80 feet high, so it's totally fine. And the other is to transform your space, where some places you regularly welcome flooding, like Wall Street. So Wall Street is transforming to be like Venice. A lot of the planning for New York is to make Wall Street like Venice, welcoming the water rather than trying to block it out. But the bigger problem is what we call mitigation, that is actually doing something about it. So the biggest single thing we can do right now is vote. The next biggest thing we can do is we're voting because we want to and need to and have to reduce emissions now. We have to reduce emissions by about 90%. That's a whole separate talk, and we're actually making progress on it as a nation and globally, amazingly, but just not fast enough. And because it's not fast enough, In order to avoid this threshold of 2 degrees warming, we're already about 1.5 degrees into it. We now actually have to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And it's just as hard as it sounds. Some of you, just a show of hands, how many of you have heard there's a facility in Iceland that is actually now actively sucking out carbon from the atmosphere? Yeah, so it's pretty well known. It's made by Climeworks. It is a facility that has fans, and it's actually pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, liquefying it, pumping it underground, and turning it into limestone in the basaltic rocks of Iceland. Very cool idea. Actually, some technology was developed at Columbia. It removes about 4,000 tons of carbon a year. We emit 40 billion tons. And if you do the math in your head, it's about 3 seconds of emissions, of today's emissions. Just doesn't scale. You probably have heard about this idea to grow 100 million trees. That's about a half an hour. So you quickly become aware that we are terrestrial beings. We live on the minority of the planet. And the biggest part of the ocean, or the biggest part of the planet, is the ocean. And the ocean, every year, without fail, takes up 3 months of our emissions. If the ocean didn't take up this carbon, Earth's temperature would be unbearably warm from the rise in carbon dioxide. It does so by what's called gas exchange. That is, you pump a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, it exchanges through crashing waves in the surface ocean, dissolves in the ocean, acidifies the ocean, and that uptake of carbon is about 3 months equivalent each year. So this is this ocean carbon pump. Remember that rain of organic matter I showed you? This sort of line here, this carbon pump, is how the ocean captures carbon in the surface ocean and sends it down to the deep ocean. If you take a radiocarbon age of carbon off of Hawaii, for example, at about a mile depth off of Hawaii, the water there is about 2,000 years old, which means that the last time that parcel of water last communicated with the atmosphere was 2,000 years ago. So if there was a way to put more carbon in the deep ocean, you could actually take it out of the atmosphere where it does all the warming and buy some time. This is called marine carbon dioxide removal. Institutionally, we are not advocates for it, but we are absolutely advocates for making sure the best science informs whatever the answer is. Because right now, there are billions of dollars going into this because it is a $1 trillion per year economy that is yet to be realized. And there are a lot of people who are not me who are charging ahead on this without regard for the ocean. There are 3 different approaches where you can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through ocean processes. One is you make the ocean, you basically spin up the ocean's biologic pump. You can do that with nutrients or micronutrients. You can grow lots of seaweed and sink it to the seafloor like a leaf pile almost in the bottom of the ocean. Another one I won't get into, but we're actually doing this, is alkalinity enhancement. Basically, it's anti-acid for the ocean. Literally, it's coming up with a way to oppose ocean acidification, and it makes the ocean a natural chemical sink for carbon. This just gives you an idea of one of these. This jar on the right has a little micro drop of dissolved iron in it, and the control on the left does not, seawater. The green is the algae that grew because of what's called the geritol effect. Basically, when you put in a drop of iron, Jamie knows this, all proteins need iron as a micronutrient. And so in big parts of the ocean that are larger than the United States, much larger than the United States, they have tons of nutrients. They should have tons of life, but they don't. They're deserts because they're starved for this micronutrient iron. You can literally write your name in algae in the ocean by putting a little trail of iron in the ocean. This is 100 kilometers across. Just gives you an idea of the scale of how effective this can be. And the idea generally is that you stimulate additional productivity in the ocean. It makes its way to the seafloor. This has happened over geologic time and time again. It's something that the ocean naturally does. What we don't know is it a good idea? Is it safe? Is the carbon durably stored? Does it work? Is it cost effective? So we've got experiments that are underway to explore this. We're also building something called the Ocean Vital Signs Network, which is essentially building Starlink. You know what Starlink is, for the ocean. So it's basically to build an undersea network of robots and moorings to be able to track ocean health as it's changing, because the ocean's rapidly changing now. This was a very interesting approach, but the idea is to be able to use these measurements to discern from the right and the left. The left would be the regular ocean, and the right might be an enhanced biologic pump ocean, and the green is carbon that's making its way to the bottom of the ocean. How could you even differentiate between these two? We cannot do that now. It's a huge area of frontier discovery. This is my last slide, which is we've learned a lot in getting into the climate solution space, and one of the things that you quickly become aware of is not only a wicked scientific problem, but it's a wicked social problem. People don't understand it, it's hard to communicate about it, and people have a very visceral love for the ocean and want to see nothing happen to it. Of course, we're doing tremendous things to it already today. And so one of the things we're learning is basically you have to put as much effort into communication and stakeholder engagement as you do on the very hardcore science and engineering that gets you there in the first place. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really fascinating and important stuff. We do have a few minutes for questions. If you have a question and you're in the room, raise your hand. Brian Johnson will come around with question cards. You can also email me, pthompson@stbarts.org, and if you're joining us online, you can also type your questions into the live chat on YouTube or the comments section on Facebook. We already have a few questions. One has to do with many of us have seen the storm in North Carolina in the past few weeks. Can you talk about storms and also their connection to sea level and what's going on in the oceans?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easy takeaway in terms of storms and climate change is that a warmer ocean injects the atmosphere with a lot more moisture. It has a very nonlinear relationship called the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, which basically says for every degree of warming, the atmosphere can hold 7% more moisture, water vapor in it. So as the ocean is warming to the degree that it is right now, the atmosphere is getting supercharged with moisture. And when those systems, as you know, we always have weather, and so when those weather systems spin up to become a cyclone or a storm, when they come onto land, they then squeeze out all that water that they've evaporated from the ocean. And what's happening with storms now is they're getting bigger, they're geographically larger, they're wetter because they're supercharged with water, and they're more destructive. So the storms that were regular storms coming through now are turning into these much more destructive storms, not only because of what I just mentioned, but actually our infrastructure, just like we saw in Sandy in New York, our infrastructure is not prepared for 3 feet of rainfall in a night. And it's just not. So this is one of the really strange things about adapting to climate change, is because communities are seeing things that have never happened in anyone's lifetime, not even this generation. So you're preparing for something that is beyond your experience.
You said that the first thing that we can do is vote. What are the other things?
You can support institutions like mine. You can so one of the things that drew me to the oceanographic was I believe in the human spirit, the human will to engage on really big, hard problems like this. And what I found is that when we engage women and men who have talents that inform these kinds of questions, that particularly with the younger generation, their hands are up. It's like, count me in. And so we're seeing just this incredible uptake of minds and talent that want to be part of the solution set. You know, I got into this business because I was curious about science, and it was just a curiosity-driven journey. Our people today are like that, but they also, almost every one of them, have this purpose that is really palpable in their lives. So part of it is, allowing people to have those experiences, either with your own children or with people that you know, is really supporting them in that journey. But a big part of this is a social challenge. So a lot of it is talking about it. You can bring this up at a dinner party that you came to an event like this, and it, particularly the ocean, actually is not. It's actually one of the few things that's not partisan. This whole MCDR actually has bipartisan support on the Senate floor right now today. Just a week or so ago, a bill was put forward and had bipartisan support, because everyone realizes that the ocean is this sort of bigger than state kind of thing.
You said that we've made some progress on emissions, and that was the topic for another talk, but can you give us a few bullet points from that talk?
Yeah, sure. So there's a really wonderful graphic on this. If you plot the United Kingdom's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions over 150 years, they were 100% of global emissions during Queen Victoria's time, and now it's 0. They have, as a nation, so reduced their greenhouse gas emissions that they are an insignificant contributor to carbon emissions at any kind of scale relative to industrialized nations or not. So if an economy like that can do this, and then you think about what's happening in Western Europe, that transition to enhanced renewables and battery storage, nuclear in the case of France, has really turned the corner. And so for those of you who are economists, there's a wonderful plot of, if you plot every country and its GDP versus its carbon emissions, it's almost a straight line. It's a log-log plot, but it's a straight line. What's happened in our lifetimes, in just the last decade, is that the highest emitters are now bending off that curve, where their GDP is still high, but their emissions are declining. And so we're kind of breaking that century-long relationship. And we're breaking it because people are acting on it. And right now, offshore wind and solar are the cheapest levelized cost of energy on the planet, and getting cheaper. So it's not only the right thing to do, it's the cheap thing to do.
Is that happening fast enough?
No. It's not happening fast enough, but actually just this past month, global investments in solar have now outpaced investments in all other energy sources globally. So it's happening elsewhere. The U.S. is stuck in this unfortunate place at the moment, but everyone else gets it.
We have a few questions about garbage. First, how does trash in the ocean affect life in the twilight zone?
Yeah, so I'll speak about plastics in particular. All of you probably know that the big gyres, the 7 gyres that exist in the world's oceans, these are the big centers of the basins north and south in the oceans. Those gyres are places where the winds are focusing all the trash into United States-sized parcels of ocean that are just loaded with garbage, loaded with trash. And those plastics, through a combination of ultraviolet radiation and abrasion, are turning into microplastics. And microplastics have made their way not only into the diets, but actually into the flesh of organisms. So that, there are ways to clean up the trash. It's much easier to get it at a point source rather than to pick it up in the ocean. But there are groups that are making good progress on that too. I can talk about that a bit more, but basically stop littering. That's the advice on that one.
And a kind of related question is recycling a good solution to prevent garbage from getting into the ocean?
Yeah, unfortunately, no, it's not. I mean, yes, it is in the sense that segregating your trash, but I think only 5% of our recyclables actually get recycled, so it's kind of a sad story in that. That's a whole other thing. We have scientists at the Oceanographic who are developing new plastic substitutes that are based on marine polymers that are more readily degraded by ultraviolet radiation, so that they basically return back to solute form rather than a particle form. And right now, one of these straws costs 4 times more than a normal plastic straw. But the more that these things make their way into the economy, the the faster we can make those kinds of transitions.
Can you talk about deep sea mining?
Yeah, bad idea. That's just one thing that I won't do at the Oceanographic in terms of it's not something I think we should be doing. So the big chunks of the seafloor are covered with these nodules. They're about the size of my fist that are concentrations of heavy metals. They've been one of these nodules, when you break them open. When I was at Columbia, we have one of the world's largest collections of these. When you cut them in half, they're layered. And it turns out then in the center of it, you often find a fish tooth or a shark tooth. And that's the nucleation point. These nodules are 60, 70 million years old, and they're still accumulating. It's the most unrenewable resource you can imagine. And they're basically built as a result of bacteria eating rock on the bottom of the ocean and liberating those metals that then go on to these little nodules. The reason why I'm opposed to it is that based on our current technology, we do have a need for these heavy metals. That's true. One of the things we're learning is that battery technologies, for them to get to scale cheaply, are now relying on much cheaper substrates. There are organic batteries, there are sodium batteries, there are batteries that are made out of elements that are abundant on the planet. And so the notion that we have to, just ruin these pristine ecosystems. Remember, I told you the seafloor life, maybe I didn't tell you this, but these beautiful little organisms that are living on top of these nodules are thousands of years old. They're like little redwood trees because it's super cold in the bottom of the ocean. Everything's slowed down. And there's a whole other story, like how can you have life that's 11 kilometers down in the ocean? They have a totally different solution for the cell membrane structure so that they can exist in those pressures. Those may be needed to understand cancer, or we just don't know. There's so much exploration. So the idea of literally raping these huge parts of the ocean for the short-term benefit based on a technology that we're moving toward away from just seems to be that's why I'm opposed.
We have time for one final question. You are a person of faith. You are a lay leader here. You're attending church up on Cape Cod. How does your faith inform your work, and what contributions can people of faith make to combat climate change?
Yeah, it's interesting because many scientists have a challenge with their faith. They think they're exclusive. And for me, the wonder of what I've shown you, to me, just affirms just how magnificent it is and how much of the world is so awe-inspiring that really transcends to kind of a spiritual level. So that's sort of it for me. What I do find is that the church communities like this one and the one I attend up in Woods Hole are often very forward-looking organizations that also approach the problem with grace rather than in a didactic way or in a political way, but in a way that's very human. And I honestly think that's sort of what we need more of now, is finding ways for us to bring people along from their soul as opposed to just their pocketbook or just from an academic perspective. And that's part of why I'm here, and that's part of why I do what I do.
Please join me in thanking Peter DeMenocal. It's been so great to have you back, and great to have all of you here as well. We hope you'll stick around, whether in person or online, and join us for worship at 11 a.m. And come back next week as Meredith and Molly begin a new series on death, end of life, and medical care and the ethical issues involved. So hope you'll be here as we begin that next week.
Thank you, everyone.